More Batman movies to review. Actually, the movie I'm going to review here is the animated feature just released by DC Universe Animated. It's the adaptation of half of Frank Miller's Batman The Dark Knight Returns, the groundbreaking classic comic from the 80s. Probably the most important Batman book ever published, and one of the most important and influential superhero comics generally ever produced. And DC Universe Animated finally got around to producing an adaptation of it, and it's coming out in two parts. The first part just came out last week. The second part comes out after the first of the year, in the first quarter of 2013, I believe. Dark Knight Returns Part 1 is pretty good. It's above average for this franchise, I think, for this series. Really good voice talent in this one. Peter Weller is doing Batman, and Ariel Winter is doing Carrie Kelly, Robin, and the performances are good. You have to sort of judge it on the sliding scale, though, because the one of the problems I have had for a long time with the DCU animated features, and really with superhero animation in general, is that they go after these legitimate actors, quote unquote, these actors who specialize in doing live action work, and what you get is less a performance from a great professional actor than it is reading with inflection, and there is a really big difference. Peter Weller does Batman in this, in Dark Knight Returns Part 1. He does a really good job. He has a great quality to his voice. He sounds cool as Batman. He sounds cool as Bruce Wayne. Most of his line readings are right, they sound appropriate, but it's not really acting, it's reading with inflection. And there's a difference between giving a performance where you are the character and you're in the scene and you are playing the role as though you are that person, like you would be if you were an actor in a live action film, and giving a reading for an animated film where you have the script right in front of you. Having that script right there and reading your lines, no matter how passionately you try to do it, no matter how much inflection and how much character you try to invest in those words, having that script there puts up a wall that is really difficult to punch through if you're a performer and give a really convincing, really real performance. Given that limitation, the voice cast in this does really well. And the adaptation itself, I think, is pretty good. Better than some of the other adaptations that this animated feature series has attempted in the past. It's faithful to the original, to the source material, to The Dark Knight Returns. It, obviously the character designs are based on Miller's designs, and the look and the tone, for the most part, is translated from the page to the screen. But there's enough new stuff. There are enough new bits to the movie that allow it to feel like its own thing. For instance, just little things like the flashback that Bruce has of him chasing the rabbit. That is entirely from Bruce's perspective. That's actually a first-person POV shot. We see little Bruce's hand sticking out and he's chasing after the rabbit, and you never see, there's not a single objective shot of that. It's all through Bruce's eyes. Even when he falls straight down into the hole and he looks up and you see like the light receding from the top, and it's really well done. And then there's also when the red phone, the bat phone rings in the Batcave after Bruce Wayne has come out of retirement and gone back to being Batman after being absent for many, many years. Commissioner Gordon calls him on the bat phone, and it's a red phone, and the noise that the bat phone makes, the ring, is the same sound that the red bat phone made in the Adam West, Burt Ward 1960s TV series. There's a really powerful moment. It actually made me think of this when I was watching the movie. There's a moment in another great Batman comic, Alan Moore and Brian Boland's The Killing Joke, where Batman, the grim 80s Batman, is looking at a photograph, an old picture of him and Robin and Batgirl, and I think even Batwoman is in it, although she's no longer a part of the official continuity at this point. And he's looking at it, and the picture, the photograph, is drawn in the 1950s big-footed Silver Age style. And it's a really extraordinary moment because it's as if the boundaries of the story, the boundaries of the reality, of the continuity are being torn down, and it's this grim, hopeless modern version of Batman looking back through the years of real life and seeing that earlier, simpler, happier, more innocent version of himself. It's a really extraordinary moment. And there are moments in Miller's Dark Knight Returns that are similar to that, like seeing the dinosaur and the penny in the Batcave and things like that. And there are moments in this adaptation, in this animated feature, that put you in mind of that recall those really great moments in the comic. Some of the shortcomings of this version, because as I said, this adaptation is above average for its franchise, but it's by no means a great movie. And there are times when it's not even a very good movie in spots. And a lot of that is brought up again when you compare it both to the source material and to the rest of the Batman character. And in general, I don't like to do that. I like to review movies within their own box. I like to judge a movie by its own standards and by itself as a single piece. And there are still shortcomings for this when you do it that way. But I think it's a little more fair to judge it in a larger context in this case, because it does make those invitations to the viewer. It does make reference to other versions of Batman. It does make reference to things outside of itself. So I feel a little bit more fair in judging it against other things like the source material. And when you judge it against the source material, it really suffers terribly in one particular aspect, and that is it feels tame compared to the comic book. The comic book, especially when it was first published, and even today when you read it today, 25, 26 years later, the Batman The Dark Knight Returns, the comic, was incendiary. It was subversive. It felt like something so new and so fresh and something that had never been done before in a mainstream comic book. And there's really none of that in this animated feature. This is exactly the sort of thing that Frank Miller was reacting to when he wrote and drew The Dark Knight Returns originally. And we've sort of come all the way around to where now the animated adaptation of Frank Miller's groundbreaking comic is pretty much just a pedestrian, workmanlike, above average, well done, competent, but hardly impressive or stunning animated feature based on that book. The Dark Knight Returns, the comic, is a great work. It's a hugely ambitious piece of work. And to see that the adaptation, this animated film, is not really ambitious at all is disappointing, even though it is competently made. It doesn't have that ambition. It doesn't have that sense of great art about it. And that's disappointing, as I said, but it's not unexpected considering who made it. Bruce Timm and his writers and his animators, his artists, they're all talented people, they're all hardworking people, they're all well-meaning people, but they seem happy with good enough. And that is probably the most irritating thing. After 20 years, after seeing these guys work on Batman in animated form for 20 years, and like it or not, love him or hate him or feel indifferently towards him, one of the most exciting things about what Christopher Nolan did with Batman in his series is you could feel that he was trying to do something great. Those films had ambition, especially the last two, Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises. They had ambition. He wanted to use these characters to say something. He wanted to tell great stories with these characters. He wanted to push his limits and tell something great. And I have never, ever, ever gotten that impression from anything that Bruce Timm and his creators have done. They're good. They're good. But they're just good enough. And I think Batman deserves better than this. And The Dark Knight Returns definitely deserves better, even though this is, as I said, an above average movie. and a fair adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns. The Dark Knight Returns deserves better than a fair adaptation. And this animated movie, for all of its good points, and for as good as it looks and as well animated as it is, it just doesn't measure up.